So today we're studying that God is justice. So we've covered that He is self-existent. We've covered that He's infinite, eternal. We've covered that He is holy, righteous, and good. And today He is both just and justice and fair, and how that all plays out. And so I thought, well, we'll do that. This is a little bit harder on us to understand God's justice sometimes. I think when we see things that are unfair in the world, it's like a little bit. I think you want to go, oh, God is good. Yes, God is fair. So I've been asked a lot, if God is love, why does this happen? If God is good, why does this happen? So I've had that, and it's dealing with justice. It really is. It comes down to justice, and so I'm going to attempt to cover this for you today. First thing that I have in God is justice is He actually is perfectly fair. He really is. He's perfectly fair. He's perfectly fair at all times, under all conditions, in all situations. Just because I do not see it from His viewpoint doesn't mean He's not fair. I have to remember that a lot when I see things happening that don't appear to be fair. He is fair. I think Job is a really good example of that. God was fair and right and just, and Job thought not. This is not fair, not right, not just, and what's going on? And fortunately, Job's great testimony is that he maintained his faith in God throughout what seemed totally unfair. And so I'm going to cover why God was fair on that in a little while. But so He is fair at all times. Justice is the part of God's essence that deals with obedience and disobedience. So this is a characteristic that He uses to deal with us. And He deals with us on both ends of that. It's both justice and obedience and disobedience. And He established a set of laws for His creation. And staying within these laws, justice is going to bless. Staying outside of these laws, justice has to punish, or He's not justice. Do you understand that? How simple that is. The Bible is like overloaded with verses on justice. If I gave them all to you, I would have, and I didn't find them all, I have a good 150 verses on justice that I could just start charting. It would take me the entire time to give them all to you. I'm going to give you a few of them, and if you guys want a copy of this, you have all the rest of them, and I didn't even put all of mine on here. So justice is all over the place. You can. One of the main ones is righteousness and justice is the foundation of His throne. He rules in truth and loving kindness. That's in, I think, Psalm 89. So it's just everywhere. And justice and righteousness are almost always spoken of like this. Okay? You hear justice, you're going to hear righteous. You're going to hear righteous, you're going to hear justice. It's spoken of as if it's a joined unit. Now, there's something really important here. God is completely God in all of His characteristics as one. And each one of those does not need the other to make it work. Okay? So it's not like righteousness stands here and says, justice, you keep in line. Because if that was the case, righteousness would be in authority over justice. And you can't do that. And justice doesn't say, righteousness, you got to stop being quite so good to this guy because he's disobedient. Because that would be justice over righteousness. So they work like this. Justice is always right. Righteousness is always just. It's just a concept I go, oh, why didn't I like put those pieces together before? And it's just straight up, God is all that. So as we cover each of his characteristics, none of them are subordinate to each other. They are all one solid unit, one unified God. That's why way back in lesson 1 I mentioned the simplicity of God. That is a theological attempt to describe how God is just one thing. And that doesn't interfere with the Trinity. That's another category of theology. I'm just trying to deal with the actual character of God. And so trying to make this clear, justice and righteousness are, it's just, I don't know how to explain it any better than that. So that's best I've got on that. Oh, here, Psalm 56. Let's go look at that. Not 56, 50, verse 6. So I thought this is one of the main ones. Not the main ones, just a straightforward one. The heavens declare his righteousness, for God himself is judge. Okay, so you got righteousness and justice together. The heavens declare his righteousness, for God himself is judge. That's Psalm 56. 89:14, I think that's the one I was referring to before. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne. Loving kindness and truth go before you. So we have 4 characteristics together on this one, all in one. You got truth, loving kindness, that's love. You got righteousness, you got justice, all functioning as one thing. And that's his throne, which means we also have sovereignty in there, which we're going to get to. So that's kind of cool. Let's see, what else am I got? He's got all these attributes. They are impartial. Psalm 9 tells us that he is impartial in his judgments. Talk about the need for equity. I know that's all over the news right now. Psalm 9, verse 4. You have maintained my just cause. You have sat on the throne judging righteously. Well, let me see if I got another one here. 7. But the Lord abides forever. He has established his throne for judgment. He will judge the world in righteousness. He will execute judgment for the peoples with equity. That's pretty cool, pretty straightforward. That's Psalm 9, 7 and 8. Verse 16 says, the Lord has made himself known, has executed judgment. And then the work of his hands, in the work of his hands, the wicked are snared. That's interesting and kind of a cool little promise, but as long as I'm not one of the wicked. So that's pretty good. He does not take bribes. That is in 2 Chronicles 19:7. Not that I would ever think that he would take bribes, but it actually states God will not take a bribe. All right? I can't bribe God. If you do this for me, I will do this and this and this and this. If you do this for me, I promise I'll be a really good girl. That's like a bribe. Yeah. Yeah, God does not take, and you know, that prayer has been said a lot. So God does not take bribes. He is called the rock. This is cool. Deuteronomy 32:4. We got some stuff in Deuteronomy to look at today. Got some stuff all over to look at today. The rock. His work is perfect, for all his ways are just. A God of faithfulness, without injustice, righteous and upright is he. That's pretty firm. That establishes it pretty well. Let's see here. His judgments are true, Psalm 19:9. I love that passage, Psalm 19. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of the Lord are true. They are righteous altogether. I know a song to that, but I don't sing really well, so I'm not going to sing it for you. Justice is applied in two ways. It can be applied positively and negatively. If it's positive justice, we call that technically, and I never say this word right, remuneration.
That's positive?
Mm-hmm. But punitive is negative. So according to, like, if when I'm reading all my like fancy books of theology books, that's what they call this, and that's toward obedience. So toward obedience, he has promised to reward. Now here's an interesting thing. If you create something and it does what you created it to do you owe it reward? So like I was thinking, the light bulb with attitude stands at looking at Thomas Edison. He goes, I am shining for you. And the light bulb, and Thomas Edison goes, all you are doing is what I designed for you to do. And if it wasn't for me doing it, you couldn't do that. So Thomas Edison owes that light bulb nothing. So God owes us no rewards. And yet, he has promised to give us rewards. That's almost overwhelming to me. Here I am, a creature, can't breathe without him, can't keep my heart beating, can't walk, can't stay on the earth without his gravity, can't wake up in the morning, can't fall asleep, etc. Could not make myself digest food. Can't make it grow. I mean, even Mary, who is the best gardener I've ever met, doesn't actually make the plants grow. God makes the plants grow. I mean, she can do everything that helps make the plants grow, but she cannot make the plants grow. She cannot send the rain. And so here I am doing all this stuff God designed for you to do, and then I say, okay, now I'm being so obedient, you have to reward me. It's like the artist saying, I paint really well, so that's my quality. Well, who put the talent in the hands? Who put the skill in the football player? Who put the energy in you? You know, I mean, so for us to say, for us to receive reward from God is an overwhelming act of grace, because he has covenanted to bless those who obey. He has promised to bless those who obey. Go look at Deuteronomy 28. I just left my notes, like I do always. Hardly. Chapter 28. Now, when you're reading chapter 28, I've read chapter 28 quite a bit of Deuteronomy. You want to take a big breath between verse 14 and 15. Just giving you a heads up in the morning, you want to take a big breath between those two places. Okay, so now it shall be, if you will diligently obey the Lord your God, being careful to do all his commandments, which I command you today. This is Moses in his last words to the Israelites. The first generation that crossed through the Red Sea and didn't want to enter the land because 10 of the spies said, oh, it's scary there. And 2 of them said, oh, yes, we can do it. So they said no, they didn't want to enter the land. And by the way, last week after they all said yes, we want to do the thing that was only like 3 months later when they wouldn't obey. So they have all died in the wilderness. This is 4 years later. They are standing on the edge of the promised land. They're just on the east side of the Jordan River in the area of Moab, right there, straight across from Jericho. And Moses is giving his final speech, and this is now the kids, the generation. They are adults now, but the generation that was kids or children or born in the wilderness are now grown up. And this is what he says to them. He says, so if you are willing to be careful to do all the commandments which I command you today, the Lord will set you high above all the nations of the earth. All these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you if you obey the Lord your God. Blessed shall you be in the city. Blessed shall you be in the country. Blessed shall be the offspring of your body and the produce of your ground and the offspring of your beasts, the increase of your herd and the young of your flock. As blessed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Blessed shall you be when you come in. Blessed you shall be when you go out. The Lord will cause your enemies who rise up against you to be defeated before you. They shall come out against you one way and shall flee before you 7 ways. The Lord will command the blessing upon you in your barns and all that you put in your hand to do. He will bless you in the land which the Lord your God gives you. The Lord will establish you as a holy people to himself, as he swore to you, if you will keep the commandments of the Lord your God and walk in his ways. So all the peoples of the earth shall see that you are called by the name of the Lord, and they shall be afraid of you. And the Lord will make you abound in prosperity, in the offspring of your body, and the offspring of your beasts, in the produce of the ground, and in the land which the Lord your God, the Lord swore to your fathers to give. The Lord will open for you his good storehouse, the heavens, to give rain to your land in its season, to bless all the work of your hand, and you shall lend to many nations, but you shall not borrow. The Lord shall make you the head and not the tail. You shall be, and you only shall be above, you shall never be underneath. If you will listen to the commandments of the Lord your God, which I charge you today, to observe them carefully, and do not turn aside from any of the words which I command you today, to the right or to the left, or to go after other gods to serve them. I'm telling you, if I was handed that, I would sign my name and say, yes, I'm on board. That sounds great. It really sounds, that's like really detailed. Everything I touch is going to prosper. Every business I try is going to work. My children are going to be blessed. My house is going to be blessed. We're going to be safe from enemies. We're going to get the rain. Everything. And oh yeah, they say, but the next section, which is like 5 times as long, is horrifying to listen to, because God, in his fairness, also tells you the other side of things. And I'll let you read that if you want to. It's just not fun to read. Some of the details on there are horrifying, but to not do it, he's laying out the plan. This is God's wonderful plan for you. This is the alternative. And unfortunately, as they go through Israel's history, they choose the alternative. And in reality, mankind always chooses the alternative. It really does. It's really, even as much as I want to do this, I find myself saying what I shouldn't say, opening my mouth when I shouldn't do it, doing the wrong thing, having an attitude of guilt, having an attitude of shame, having just, self-righteousness. You pick it. It's not probably as blatant as some of these, but it's really the same thing. So it's this issue that we have to all deal with all the time, right. Choosing which way we're going to follow. And God is fair in this as he deals with us on both sides. So I got all kinds of stuff here. Let's see. We don't merit our, it even tells us in 1 Chronicles 29:14, we do not merit our own stuff. So let's see here, 1 Chronicles 29:14. I think we are at the dedication of the temple. Okay, so they are about to dedicate the temple, and I can't remember if it must be David who's saying this, and he's bringing to God his tremendously huge offering. And he's putting it in the storehouse so that Solomon, his son, can build this temple. And there's this big they all gather, and he says, "Now therefore, O God, we thank you and praise your glorious name. But who am I? And who are my people that we should be able to offer as generously as this? For all things come from you, and from your hand we have given." So he's acknowledging that even what he gives is not his own merit to give. It's what God has done. So it's all over the place like that. Isaiah 30:18. Before I jump into punitive judgment, I want to set you up with all the blessings.
Say it again, Jeff.
Isaiah 30:18. Therefore the Lord longs to be gracious to you, and therefore he waits on high to have compassion on you. For the Lord is a God of justice. How blessed are all those who long for him. So out of his justice, he's waiting to bless. I was always under the impression since 11 in Sunday school that God blessed me out of his love. And he probably does. But I never crossed my mind that he blessed me out of his justice. I just thought, what a cool concept. Now, God is also going to have punitive justice, because otherwise he's not fair. If he doesn't have punitive justice, he's not fair, because there are times when that is needed. All right, he's promised to do this too. You can just read the rest of Deuteronomy 28 and you will read a huge list of punitive justice. If you don't do this, you will be cursed. If you do this, you will be cursed. If you have other gods, you will be cursed. If you do this, your children will be cursed, your land will be cursed, your house will be cursed, everything you have will be cursed, everything you touch will be cursed, and it gets worse than that. So there's yours. So he lays out the plan. So mankind doesn't walk in, the Israelites didn't walk into the promised land planning to live God's life without living as a nation, without knowing the consequences on both sides. They knew what they would get if they obeyed. They knew what they would get if they disobeyed. And at the end of Joshua's life, he does the same thing over again. As a matter of fact, halfway through Joshua's life, they get halfway through conquering the land, and he gathers them between Ebal and Gerizim, these two mountains, and he makes them go over this again. He reviews all that again. And then at the end of his life, he's about to die, and he gets them all together, he goes, okay, now you choose for yourselves this day who you will serve. You choose this side or you choose this side. And they all said, oh, we will choose the Lord, we will choose the Lord. Very next generation. And they all did what was right in their own lives, and that's the story of Judges. And it goes on and on and on. And so then we have the various judges come up, and Gideon comes up, and they go, oh, we will follow the Lord, what's going on? Oh, God, it's so horrible. And, and then they get delivered. Oh, yes, and then his kids? No. And the next one, and the next one. It really makes Deuteronomy 5 and 6 very important. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. And these words which I am commanding you today shall be in your hearts, and you shall teach them diligently to your children. and you shall speak of them. How often? When you walk in the way. Well, they didn't drive, so they walked in the way all the time. And when you sit down, I sit down quite often. And when you stand up, and when you go to bed, and when you get up, and you're supposed to put it as a sign over your door, and you're supposed to write it on your forehead. And that wasn't literal. That's like, get it into your head, put it around your wrists, tie it around your neck, get it close to your heart, make your hands do it. You know, I mean, really you weren't supposed to wear, I don't think you were intended to wear verses as headbands and around your neck. I think what he's talking about is get it into you. Yeah, on your doorposts, on your gates, so that you can pass it on to the next generation. It takes that kind of diligence to pass it on to the next generation. Passing it on to the next generation is a difficult thing, especially in our culture. It's really hard to pass it on to the next generation. And so I am grateful that we have such a strong children's ministry that we can at least attempt. And I'm grateful for all those parents who pour that into their children. And those grandparents who pour that into their grandchildren. Because grandparents have a special opportunity to get listening ears that parents don't always get, you know? So that's cool, but Israelites didn't, they didn't hardly ever have 2 generations in a row where they stayed with it. And I've gone over that story with you guys already, but they keep doing it the other way. Okay, so in the garden, God made obedience clear. You either do this, you are not to eat it. That was it. You're not to eat from the tree of the garden of the knowledge of good and evil, and if you do, you will die. On the day you do, you will die. We're gonna go over this a little bit because all kinds of questions come up on this one. Wait a minute, Debbie. They didn't die. God just lied. Anybody heard that? Anybody thought that? Anybody had that mind thought? Okay, well, you haven't had enough people ask you questions yet then. So I will go over that with you in a bit, okay? But here's the thing. God cannot lay down a law, add a penalty, threaten to uphold the penalty, and then just proceed to ignore it when it's violated. He cannot do that. If he does, he's not that. And if he's not that, he's not any of it. So he has to do this. Abraham calls God out on this. Whoa, Abraham, you've got guts. He actually calls God out on this. He goes, God, if you are fair, how can you do that? That takes guts to actually stand in front of God and say that. This is in Genesis chapter 18. So the Lord happens to be talking to Abraham. This is what we would call a theophany, and that's when God, prior to the birth of Jesus Christ in the Old Testament, appears in human form or angelic form or some way in which you can a human can see him and has a conversation with someone. Only a few people got that. But Abraham did. And God comes to him and says, Abraham, I'm going to have to go down there and destroy those cities. And Abraham says, verse 25. Well, 7, 19, 18, 25. Good, he says to him, this takes guts. Far be it from you to do such a thing, God, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous and the wicked are treated alike. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all earth deal justly? I hand it to you, Abraham. That took some guts. And it turns out that what Abraham's thinking is that there's righteous people in Sodom and Gomorrah. He was under some false information because God says, if there's 50, then I won't do it. I'll save the whole, and I don't know how many people in this big city, but 50 is not a very large proportion of it. If there are, I'll save it. And then Abraham's thinking, oh, wow. Now he's adding up his people he knows in his head. Maybe 45 God. And then he's thinking, okay, now I'm not sure about them. God, maybe 40. You know, and he keeps going down, and now he's down to just his own nephew's family. And he's counting the members of the family, I'm guessing. And he goes, can there be 10? Can you do it for 10? Because, you know, you got Lot, his wife, you got his 2 girls, he's got some son-in-laws, so you add this up, you get about 10. And God says, all right, but there weren't 10. So Abraham finds out, and God was just, because the ones who did believe got rescued out of there. So justice still did take place. I still thought that was crazy that Abraham called God out on that. And that he found out that God was just. So yeah. Okay, the other thing I was thinking, if there's not, well, the idea that God is good, for God to be good is just, that's easy, a concept for infinity. For humans, we do not understand the word good without an opposite. We can't define it. If everything was equally good, there's no definition of good. There's got to be a contrast. Otherwise, you won't say, that cookie's good and that one's not. You know, what, this one's hard and dry and that one's sweet and chewy and we like that one and we don't like this one. Or if there's got to be a contrast. There's got something. So in doing this, the best I read of was the fact that evil is the contrast. So I have to, and my thought has always been, God, what about evil? What do we do with evil? Where did that come from? What is that? And most of the theologians, guys, like Schaeffer and Thiessen and Strong and another guy, Shedd, all of them conclude that evil is not a thing in itself, it's a concept. Just like good is a concept. Good is a concept, evil is the opposite concept. If you have good, now up until a certain point, you got eternity past and you've got the potential of evil perhaps, but there is no demonstration of it because there's just God, right? There's just God and He's good. And I find this crazy because when God is thinking, and this is human language because thinking about creating, because He was never thinking about not creating. You know, I'm trying to figure out how to talk and split anyway. If He's going to create something, and He's going to give it any kind of thing that is not robotic, He's got to give it some kind of option of making a decision, having a free will. And as soon as He does that, the opposite has potential of entering into function. You following me on this? Okay, so the question, and it was asked to me by a kid after getting a glimpse of some of this. So why did God even do it? Well, I don't know. He doesn't need it. He did not need to start creation because He needed love. He's got that. He doesn't need it to be glorified. He's got that. He doesn't need it because He's lonely. He's got that. He doesn't need it for any reason. And yet He did. You know, I mean, that puts huge value on each of us. That puts huge value, because what it's going to cost him, because of the potential, is tremendous. So this is what he does, and this is evil. He's going to create angels. Now, exactly when angels were created is a good question. On timeline of history, you've got, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Angels could have been created prior to that, because this part of this book is God's story to man. It's not God's story to angels. So angels interact, but it's not particularly the angel story. What the angel story is a big question I want to ask God when I get there. It is on my list. So they could have been created prior to that. There's another theory that between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2, they were created, and this fall of Satan caused the tohu wabohu, the what is it in English? You guys know verse 2. Void and formless and void. Okay, so there's that theory. It's both of them. Neither one of them can be proven. So I would just say pick the one you like and go for that, or just leave it hanging. Regardless, I was telling this to a bunch of kids, and we were sixth graders, and they were. One kid goes, "Well, he was created, wasn't he?" Yeah, and he goes, "Well, that's probably the issue." And I go, "You're right. That's probably the issue. The angels were created." So as he creates these angels, he does not create them in that they are male and female having children and progeny coming down through the lines. He does not create them as a progressive race. I don't know how you say that. You know, one that's, okay. He creates them all, like, right there. So they're done a little bit different than Adam. And we'll get into why that might be an issue. But he creates them all. He gives them some kind of hierarchy. He gives them mentality. He lets them, they can think, they have choices, they worship him, they do all kinds of things. And one of them is the leader of the entire worship team, which is the billions and billions and billions of angels out there. And how long this went on as he was happily leading all this, I have no clue. I have no clue. But Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28 describe his fall. You guys know who I'm talking about. I'm talking about Satan. And he's called Lucifer. Lucifer is actually the Latin translation of the phrase morning star. So he's called that. So it could be his name. It might not really be his name. We might not know his actual name. But what difference does that make? We can call him Lucifer, you can call him Satan, you can call him the devil. He's all the same person. And so he's the deceiver. He is, and here's the interesting thing. He has beauty beyond anything any human's ever seen. He has riches and jewels beyond anything any human's ever seen. He has position of authority. He has God's love. He has everything. He has everything. And there's a couple things he doesn't have. He does not have a sin nature. And he does not have outside temptation. Because no evil is in function as of yet. So how he pulled this off, I don't know. Because even Adam and Eve had outside temptation. But he did not. And so the best I can come up with is that it might have just been straight up envy. He was envious of who God was. And he wanted to be that. Just straight up envy. He coveted that like the 10th commandment. Do not covet. Now, maybe there's more. I don't know. We'll have to add this to our list when we get to heaven. How did a person with no inner nature to sin do this? But he did, and when he did, evil entered the world. Not the world, the existence. And God knew when he made them that he would do that. And he made them anyway. And at that point, all these angels get to choose individually, this side or this side. Which side are you going to take? You're going to go Satan's side, or you're going to go God's side? And 1/3 goes Satan's side, 2/3 go God's side. Did God offer a redemption, a possibility? That I don't know. I can't find anywhere that it says it did. He did. I can't find anywhere it says he didn't. I just don't know.
What's the verses that where you're, I'm so ignorant of the Old Testament. So tell me the verses where you're talking about.
Okay.
Where he made tons of angels and that they decided to how they chose.
Okay, well, I'll tell you where Satan fell is in Isaiah 14. I think that's like 11 through 14, but I'm going to have to look. In the Old Testament, if you read through this chapter, you're gonna have questions. One of the things that the prophets did is they would tell two stories simultaneously, and it was usually a current story and a prophetic story. A virgin shall be with child, and he shall bear a son. You know that one. It's the promise of Jesus. Well, there was a current story of a lady who wasn't quite a virgin but was called that, and so there was a current story going on, and then there was Jesus. We know it's Jesus' story because Matthew tells us directly that is a prophecy of Jesus, so we know that. So you should know that there's almost always two different things going on. There was that was how the people back then knew that their prophets were telling them the truth. Because something happened. If someone tells you, in 600 years, Messiah is going to be born, you go, okay, how do I know you're telling me the truth? I'm dying before then. So they would almost always have a current thing going on simultaneous to a future thing going on. So you have to understand. In this one, there's a story going on between a man from, I think he's the king of Tyre, and he's receiving this information, but it's also a picture of Satan. So I warned you about that, because when you read through it, you go, I'm not sure. So your pomp and the music of your harps have been brought down to Sheol. Maggots are spread out as your bed beneath your worms, and worms are your covering. And then here it picks up with Satan. Oh, how you have fallen from heaven, O star of the morning. That's where you get Lucifer. Son of the dawn, you have been cut down to earth, you who have weakened the nations. You have said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. The stars is a metaphor for angels, often in the Old Testament. I will sit on the mount of the assembly in the recesses of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High God. So that's the actual fall. If you want details of the fall, what did I say? Isaiah, it's actually like 12 or 13. I don't know the verses on this one. Oh, here's one where it's that I'm sorry, I got the two mixed up. This one's the one with the king of Tyre. Son of man, take up a lamentation over the king of Tyre and say to him, thus says the Lord God, you had the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering. The ruby, the topaz, the diamond, the beryl, the onyx, the jasper, the lapis lazuli, the turquoise, the emerald, and the gold of the workmanships of your settings and sockets was in you on the day that you were created. They were prepared. So he was phenomenally wealthy. You were the anointed cherub who covers. I placed you there. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked in the midst of the stones of fire. This is all metaphorical to things going on. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created until unrighteousness was found in you. By the abundance of your trade, you were internally filled with violence, and you sinned. Therefore I have cast you as profane from the mountain of God. I have destroyed you, O covering cherub, from the midst of the stones of fire. Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom by reason of your splendor. I cast you down. Okay, so that's the fall of Satan. That takes us through about 17. Where it says that a third of the angels followed him is actually in Revelation chapter 12, probably around verse 6, but I'm guessing. Revelation chapter 12 describes a war in heaven, and just as this one's future, I'm torn between this is future or if this is a description of the past with a repeat in the future, like a replay. So I'm not exactly sure, but it does describe this war in heaven. Starting at verse 7. Oh, wait a minute. Starting at verse 3. Then another sign was prepared in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads were 7 diadems. And his tail swept away a third of the stars of heaven, and he threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she gave birth, he would devour her child. This is talking about Satan's trying to destroy Jesus Christ. And she gave birth to a male child who was to rule the nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and to his throne. So this is a description of how God protected that child. It's metaphorical in this thing here. And then, this is verse 7, and there was war in heaven, and Michael and his angels waged war with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels waged war. And they were not strong enough, and there was no longer a place found for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, the serpent of old, who is called the devil, Satan, and who deceives the whole world. And he was thrown down, and his angels were thrown down with him. So there's where I get the concept that a third of the angels were went with Satan.
Thank you.
Sure, that was important information. And so we have Satan's fall, and then sometime in this area, God creates the heavens and the earth, and He creates Eden. And it is good. It is very good. When God says it's very good, it is that perfect good. It's good. But there's evil in the existence now. And evil enters this garden. And before evil enters the garden, God plants a tree. And I tell you what, I've had this question for forever. Why plant the tree? Why did He plant the tree? Why start the problem by planting the tree? I mean, if He had never planted the tree, they wouldn't have eaten from the tree. They couldn't have disobeyed. That has been on my list for a long time. So here God plants the tree. It says God made the tree. He planted the tree. It's the knowledge of good and evil. And then he says, don't eat from it. Well, my little kids, when my kids were little, they have to understand, they already had little sin natures in their heads. And Adam and Eve don't have sin natures in their heads. So there's a little bit of a difference going on here. But if I said, I'm going to put this bowl of cookies out here on the table, but you cannot eat them. I mean, what are the odds that they were going to obey me on that one, right? So, anyway, this is me talking to God. Okay, God, I don't get it, so why? And so I was really thinking about this. The best I can come up with, my guess, okay? You gotta know my guess. Evil is in existence. And evil's going to invade because he already wants to be like God. So he's already going to invade God's territory. And if they didn't have a warning ahead of time, they would have been sucked into this without knowing. And yes, Eve is deceived because she falls for it without whatever. How she was deceived particularly, because it looks pretty straightforward to me, but it tells us she was deceived, so she was deceived. But Adam was not deceived. And Adam knew. So the sin of the human race is charged to Adam. And Satan, when he comes in and he tempts Eve, he actually tempts Eve with the very same thing that tempted him. You get to be like God. You get to be as smart as God. There's stuff God knows you don't know. Don't you want to be as smart as God? Yeah. And so she was deceived. And when she hands it to Adam, Adam is not deceived. So here's the difference. The angels decided, each one individually decided for themselves, yes, I'm going to go this way, or yes, I'm going to go that way. As far as initially, okay? We got a sin nature from Adam because of Adam's decision. So Adam passed down the inner nature to disobey to us because of what he did through progeny. And that is in Romans 5:12. If you want to know where it actually says we got Adam's sin nature, is Romans 5:12. Another one is 1 Corinthians 15:22. So this one says, here, this is one thing to mind first. For Adam, as in Adam all die, but in Christ all shall be made alive. So we got the sin nature with the judgment of death for that. Okay? So that's why we died. Romans 5:12. For just as through one man sin entered the world, and death through sin, so death spread to all men, for all have sinned. That's Romans 5:12. So, did we really get it? Yes. Are we really under this? Yes. Okay, so all the way through this, though. And then, what if they had, so here's a nice what if. Well, I'm going to get to that. We're going to do that after the break. So I'll take a break. Here Adam and Eve, and they are now actually in cognizance of what holiness really is, because they have contrast now, and they are not. And it is absolutely devastatingly terrifying. So they've got to cover, they've got to hide, they've got to solve their problems. I have a fig tree, And I would never make clothes out of fig leaves because I'm they itch and burn all over my body. And I'm thinking, you guys are out of your mind to choose that tree. But anyway, so they go and they hide. And of course they hide. They have to hide. They have to distance themselves from the glory of the holiness of God, because they are just like been crashed over with what that is really like. Prior to this, they did not have the opposite. So they did not understand. And they are now on the guilty side, not on the holy side. So they go hide. So the verse said, "In the day you eat of it, you will surely die." And that actually did happen. You see, there's all kinds of deaths in the Bible. There is physical death. There is spiritual death. There is something called the second death. There's other deaths, but those three will do it for now. They definitely died spiritually. They are now separated from God, so it really did come true. And before the day is out, if justice doesn't take place, actually, justice will take place. Either way, something else has got to die. Something physical has to die this day. And God, in His justice, had declared way back, before He created those angels, before evil took its first demonstration, before evil became evident in the contract, as He's thinking this out, and this is all human language because He doesn't have to think it out. He was going to solve this problem ahead of time. And somewhere back there, it was determined that a vicarious judgment could be given. And if that was not the case, Adam and Eve would have died physically that day. Because a vicarious judgment did take place. And in justice, He is punishing the sin. If He had to punish the person, we would have to die for our sins. If there was no room in true justice for this vicarious payment. But because we get this vicarious payment, we can. It's a beautiful picture. God goes looking for Adam and Eve. They don't want to be found. And they have to answer because you can't hide from God. They don't know the story of Jonah, but you can't hide from God. And so God looks at Adam and He goes, "What happened?" And He immediately, this sin nature that has been created for less than a day is in full function. Probably they are arguing behind the leaves, complaining about the itch from the figs. Eve is probably upset with Adam. Adam is probably, can you see the picture? Probably the sin nature is full blast within an hour or less.
Wasn't there guilt?
There's guilt.
Okay.
There's all kinds of. Didn't have guilt before. They didn't know they were naked before. So they didn't have shame. They didn't have any of this. They do now. They have all of this. And they have to get rid of this. Each person has to get rid of this blame. They've got to find their own way. So Adam blames her. Because he can't handle his own guilt. But she can't handle it either. So she has to blame the snake. Right? So and you can see that. How many times two kids in the car get in trouble for doing something? She made me do it. I didn't do it. She made me do it. We hear it everywhere. And adults do the same thing. We just do it a little bit sneakier, like whatever. And we do the same because we cannot handle the guilt of sin. So this is my imagination picturing the garden, and God is looking for them, and God is walking toward them. And the last thing they want is God, because justice has to happen. Right now, justice has to happen. If I was standing there in the garden and justice has to happen and God's looking for me and coming toward me, that's the last thing I want, is God to get close. And I always pictured him walking right by them and getting an animal. And in my picture, it's a lamb. Just because of what's going to happen. Now, the Genesis story doesn't tell us this, but we know it has to happen because otherwise you can't have skins. You know, it's impossible to get skins without killing an animal. So he is going to clothe them in skins, so it has to be, I mean, you don't get skins off of a tree. You got to get it from an animal. So he had to get an animal. I picture him piling a bunch of rocks up. I picture him taking a piece of flint and sharpening it and killing. He has to have something to skin that animal. And Adam and Eve are standing there watching a vicarious death take place for them. And they are finding out for the very first time what that means. And that's horrifying. That's horrifying. And they're seeing something else suffer for them. And then he stands there and he makes these skins. He goes, I can hear him, free will still exists. I can hear him putting the skins together. Do you want to be clothed with these skins? And they put them on. There's a verse in Galatians chapter 3, I think it's verse 27, that we are clothed in Jesus Christ. And he is that picture of that sacrifice. There's a lot of other things that happen immediately afterwards that give credibility to this story. Both Cain and Abel understood about sacrifice and altars, and one was doing from the flocks. So there's where I get my idea of the sheep, because Adam would have taught his sons, and Abel brings either a goat or a sheep from the flock. And it goes on like that. There's a lot of stuff like this. And then as the story goes on, God writes a consistent story. It's the Passover lamb. It's the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. So there's this wonderful thing about justice. He provided in justice for a vicarious payment for the crime. It's overwhelming. And then forgiveness is given from justice. You think about it. A judge on the court finds someone, let's say, pardons someone. Justice gives the pardon. Maybe the judge loves the guy, maybe the judge doesn't love the guy. But justice gives the pardon. Justice gives the forgiveness. I always thought I got forgiven from love. I'm sure there's a ton of love in my forgiveness. But I think the actual legal standing is justice. Because the penalty's been paid, forgiveness can be given. That meant a lot to me. That just touched. That justice did that. Let's see where I'm at here. Same thing happened to Isaiah. You know, I left him at the standing before God as a broken wreck last week, and he's undone and he's ruined and he has seen the glory of God, and he goes, is this from human standpoint a very righteous man that just all of a sudden realized how much he isn't, and he stands, and then God sends, what does God do? God sends one of those seraphim to the altar to get a coal. The coal is so blazing hot that the seraphim cannot touch it. He has to use tongs to get it. You don't get a coal on an altar without a sacrifice there. And then he takes that coal, because that's the result of the sacrifice. He takes that coal and he touches Isaiah's lips. Let's go look at that story. It's Isaiah chapter 6. 6, yes. So I'll start at the beginning of the story. In verse 2, or verse 1, in the year of King Uzziah's death, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, lofty and exalted, with the train of his robe filling the temple. Seraphim stood above him, each having 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called out to the other and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the foundations of the thresholds trembled at the voice of him who called out, while the temple was filling with smoke. Then I said, Woe is me, for I am ruined, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a burning coal in his hand, which he had taken from the altar with tongs. And he touched my mouth with it, and he said, Behold, this has touched your lips. Now look at this. This is justice. Your iniquity is taken away, and your sin is forgiven. Then I heard, overwhelming, huh? Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Who shall I send for us? And who will go? And I said, Here am I, send me. I mean, what other response would you have after that? Right? Yeah. So that's the story of that. In the Old Testament, this is a little side note, justice, forgiveness, and the sacrifice and the lambs, there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of lambs sacrificed in the temples over the years, in the tabernacle, over and over. You get to one Passover with Josiah, and there's something like 10,000 lambs sacrificed on that day. It's just unreal how many lambs were sacrificed, how many bulls, and all the sacrifices were just amazing. It was, and then they all represented justice and forgiveness, like on a credit card. It's the best illustration I've got. You go into a store, you live way back here in Joshua, or in 1 Kings, or in 1 Samuel, and you take your lamb to the altar, and you get your sins forgiven. As soon as you have a new pile of sins, you've got to get a new lamb and have your sins forgiven. And it's like walking into a store with a credit card. You hand them the credit card. You get to take the item. And in your mind, it's like it's paid. But in reality, it's not paid until you actually write the check to, or hit the thing on your iPad or whatever, and you pay the bank for the credit card. But to these people back here, you feel it. If you take your kid to the store and you buy something with the credit card, they think it's paid for because you handed them the card. Right? So that's what it was like, and this piled up, and this piled up, and these sacrifices piled up and piled up and piled up, and God forwarded the bill. The forgiveness was given, but He forwarded the bill. Now, not only that is He prorated the bill from the future backwards. I guess that's the right word. He took the bill that was after the cross and put it here. And the volume of that debt is infinite. And that's what our vicarious sacrifice paid for us. That is why it was such agony at the Garden of Gethsemane, because he knew what was the total on that credit card. And it is beyond. God had to black out the universe because I don't think even the angels could absorb what was happening. And God had to turn away. He said, my God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus had to do that on his own. And he knew it in eternity past. And said, I will deal with justice there. And that comes down. Did he scream? I don't know. Did he? I don't know. It was like going to hell for us. Eternally. Lake of fire for each one. As indescribably awful as that is. And that's what he did. So when he yells out, it is finished, those are the victory words of all time. Other than maybe he is risen. He is finished. He paid it all. And Hebrews 12:2 tells us, how did he pull that off? Because he actually had the faith in himself to know what was coming. It said, for the joy set before him, he endured that cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the Father. I mean, I know you guys all know this story. It's just so good for us to remember this story and never let it leave our close consciousness, because justice was paid for us. That is the really critical issue here. So, now that you know that, there are times in human history where God seems unfair, and we do not understand. Okay, close that last chapter and move on. And there are times, so I thought I would deal with a little bit when God seems unfair. Why is there suffering? Why do bad things happen? Stuff like that. Because if you interact with very many people who are semi-interested in God or semi-interested in arguing with you about God, they will bring this up. This will be the issue. One of the big ones is God is really unfair because he hardened Pharaoh's heart. Anybody ever heard any of that argument? No? God is really unfair because he hardened Pharaoh's heart. If you read that story in detail, Pharaoh hardens his own heart until the 6th plague, and then God hardens his heart. And up until then, he hardened his heart or his heart was hardened. And it doesn't say that God, but on the 6th plague it says God hardened his heart. So he was already and prior to the plagues, he had his he hardened his heart with the snake and the thing, the snake eats up the staff and the snake. And the initial thing, so Pharaoh had fair justice. And it does say why God did that, because he wanted to demonstrate to the rest of Egypt his power. And they believed that he was just one of a zillion gods. They had a whole pantheon of gods, the Egyptian gods, and they needed to know that this God was stronger than those gods. Otherwise, you couldn't save those people. And a few of them did get saved, because a few of them came with them across the Red Sea. So that's cool. So there's one instance of that. Job is another one. Here's, Job is probably why was God so unfair to Job? From Job's point of view, that's exactly how it looked. This is exactly how it looked. And we know the backstory. Job did not know the backstory. The backstory is Satan's, entering the courtroom. God actually initiates the proceedings. He goes, "What you doing?" "I'm not doing much, wandering around." And God says, "Well, have you noticed Job?" So God brings up Job. And it's not Satan who brings up Job. God brings up Job. And he goes, "Yeah, well, the only reason Job does this is because you're good to him. You've blessed him. He has no hard times, nothing. No justice has ever come to Job, da-da-da-da-da," right? And so here, now we have a conflict. And I'm telling you, angels are watching. Not just Satan. Job is now the center of the universe. And if God tells Job what's going on, his testimony is destroyed. Because he's back to, God only does it, he only obeys me because you're good, he's good to you. If Job goes, "Oh my goodness, I'm on the witness stand, I'm on the testimony for the entire angelic realm, and their conflict's going on, okay, I can handle this." But if he doesn't know it, then he's a neutral witness. And God can really prove his point. So, how many times has God put one of us on the witness stand? Hopefully not as much as Job, but for some reason. And that we cannot know because it would destroy what's going on. There's another... How many times... there's another thing... why does God not stop sin? Why does he just stop it? Why doesn't he just take it away? Well, one guy said, what if a martyr, what's his name? William Tyndale. William Tyndale, you guys know who William Tyndale is? He is one of the first people to translate the Bible into English. And what he did was, it was illegal to have an English Bible in England at this time. You had to have Latin. Only Latin was spoken in church. Nobody spoke Latin other than the priests and the hierarchy in the church. So all the people went to church, they heard blah, 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 heard nothing, and went home. Well, William Tyndale is not like, this is dumb. So he happens to be a scholar, and he knows Greek and Hebrew and Latin, and he translates these tiny little New Testaments so they could be hidden in pockets. They really were. And he gets caught. Big long story. He gets caught. His Old Testament gets destroyed, his original translation. He has to start over. He has to run to Germany. He has to live in exile. He has to ship him into England. He has to hide him in bales and whatnot so people can get, it's a real cool story. Anyway, he finally gets turned in by a friend, of course. And he gets carried in front of the king, and the king, the high archbishop or whatever, and they find him guilty. And he's going to be burned at the stake. All he has to do to not be burned at the stake is denounce Jesus. That's all he has to do. So the question was brought up by somebody I was reading on why does not God stop sin? And they said, couldn't William Tyndale have stopped the sin of murder by rejecting Jesus? So what would have been right? See the argument there? I go, oh, okay. There are times when it is. You have to leave people their decisions. You have to let it go. You have to let God handle that. Because he would have been wrong to stop that sin of murder. And that is happening all over the world to this day. As a matter of fact, there was a guy in, I think, 2019 who was a young man in his 20s, maybe 28, and he was going to an island, I think, somewhere off Madagascar that nobody has been to yet. And they are terrified of people. They kill anybody who gets near him. And he was going there with the gospel, and he didn't even get out of the boat. and he was martyred. Same story happened in North Korea around 1880 maybe, and this guy is bringing Bibles to, well, it's not North Korea then, it's just Korea, but he's bringing Bibles to this thing, and they kill him before he gets off the boat. But some of his Bibles float in and survive somehow. And one person took this Bible that was falling apart and wrote it on the walls of their house so that they could retain it. Turns out that 50 years later, that house becomes a little church. And they have the copy of that. And so did the guy die in vain? No. No, and you have to believe the same about the recent one. And it's all over the place. If you guys read The Voice of the Martyrs or any of those kinds of things, you will find people being martyred constantly for their faith currently. As a matter of fact, they estimate more people are martyred for their faith today than ever before. Actually, almost combined. It's becoming very, very serious. That's how important the truth is. I'm way off subject, but so you might want to know, why is there suffering? Suffering sometimes is a result, consequences of sin. There are consequences. God can judge the sin, but the consequences of your sin, what happens as a result, has to go on. If not, we never learn anything. So I'm going to tell you David's story. David should have been out fighting the battle. It's wartime, it's spring, when the armies go out to war, and the king is the general of the army. He is to go out to battle. That is ancient Near East history normality. So he does not, he stays home. He sees a lady taking a bath on her roof. She's been maligned a lot for doing that. She doesn't know that the king isn't gone. And if you see the way they think, they don't have inside baths. So I don't know that she was guilty for that. That's my personal opinion on that one. And when the king summons her, you don't really have a lot of choice in that. So anyway, you guys know the story. David and Bathsheba, and he takes Bathsheba. He ends up killing her husband. All kinds of things go wrong, and life more or less goes on, and she gets pregnant, and she has a baby, and Nathan the prophet enters the throne room, which is the courtroom, and tells this story to David. Okay, and so David acknowledges him. David is sitting on the throne as judge at the moment. This is a justice situation. And so Nathan goes, I have a court case, and David goes, let me hear it. And he goes, there's this guy, and he is a poor man, and he has one lamb for the family. And has a neighbor, a rich man, and he has, herds of lambs for his family. And the rich man has company come, and he doesn't want to take any of his lambs. So he goes to his probably subordinate, takes his lamb and sacrifice and has that lamb for dinner. David is furious. He is furious. He wants to give the man the death penalty. According to the Mosaic law, he cannot give the man the death penalty because stealing a sheep is not worthy of the death penalty. But what it is worthy of is to be paid 4 times over. So he goes, he deserves to die, but he can't die, so he's going to have to pay 4 times over. So so David pronounces the just judgment, justice. And it was a just judgment. He should have died, but he can't. So Nathan goes, you guys know the story. You're the man. And all of a sudden reality hits David. So, consequences, 4 times over. He says, Nathan says, because you have done this and because you have murdered and you've committed adultery and you've hidden it, anyway, this sword will never depart from your family. Whoa. Okay, so you go down the line a little bit, and the sword never departs from your family, and you say, why is God unfair? You know, this is a result of a consequence. Now, David is forgiven of this sin. If you've read Psalm 32 or 51, he's forgiven of this sin. Justice pays the debt, but there's still the consequence. And David is a man after God's own heart, so we're talking about a guy who really does want to obey God and just majorly blew it this time. So what happens next? Amnon is David's oldest son. David has several wives, and so he's got all these half-brothers and half-sisters in this large family. Amnon is the oldest son, and he likes a half-sister over here. All right, she's not interested in him, and she wears long sleeves. And in that day, a long sleeve by a princess means I'm a virgin, you cannot have me. And so, and Amnon is very upset. Now a cousin comes into the story, and he says, Amnon, why are you just moping around all the time? What's wrong with you? And so Amnon says, well, I really want Tamar over here, but she's wearing long sleeves, and she, you know, and so he goes, I'll tell you what to do. Pretend that you're sick. And when the king comes to see how come you're so darn sick, tell him you just need someone to care for you and serve you dinner, and just whatever, and ask for Tamar. Well, the king falls for it. Tamar comes in, she's doing what she's told, and she's wearing her long sleeves, and she's serving him, and finally he gets her alone, and he rapes her. And then she begs him to marry her, because otherwise she is cast out. And he refuses. So this is like payment. You see the consequences? All right, so he refuses. She gets cast out. She goes out. She rips off her sleeves and lives in disgrace. Her full brother is Absalom. And Absalom is furious and is going to take revenge for his sister. But he's going to do it in such a way that he's real sneaky about this. So he waits 2 full years, and then he throws this big party to get all the sons, all his brothers and half-brothers have this big party. And while he's there, he orders his men to kill Amnon. So we have incest, we have murder. As soon as that happens, Absalom has to flee. He ends up creating a rebellion against David and starts this civil war, which lasts and almost succeeds. As he's doing that, he takes all of David's concubines and rapes them in public, in front of everyone. And that's only the first generation. So God will not just, God's justice cannot just say, oh, let me forgive you. Jesus will pay for it. Let me forgive you. I will just color you in pretty pink roses from here on out, and all's good. If he does that, then we don't have value to right and wrong and obedience. So God does not do that. So as you go down the line, these people, like Tamar might say, why am I suffering like this? So God's justice to her has to be an individual thing, a provision for her in another way, because those kinds of things happen. If you look at almost all the suffering in the world, you can trace it back to something like this. There are times like Job when suffering was there and it wasn't as a result of a sin. It was a result of a court case. So I'm just trying to point out that all these times when we feel like God is unfair, we have to remember He really is just. He really knows. We just don't see it from His point of view. He is really fair. He is really just. And that's, I think, about it. For your homework, I'd like you to try to read Psalm 103 and just do what we did with Isaiah 40. See if you can find how many attributes you can find. I did not find one in every verse. So if you don't find one in every verse, if you find one in every verse, let me know. Because I did not find one in every verse. Dear Father in heaven, we stand here before you ever so grateful that you are just. We thank you that your justice is righteous. We thank you that your justice is infinite and it's eternal. We thank you that it's also covered with love. We thank you for the fact that you planned for a vicarious substitute for us way from the beginning and before the beginning. We thank you that you are just who you are and that we can be part of your creation, part of your love, part of one of your servants. Help us to learn to deal with others justly and fairly and righteously. And all these things we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.